Edward Hensley had never feared airports until the night he met Margaret Vela, fellow passenger whose pale eyes followed him through every gate, even when she was nowhere to be seen by the time his flight was called. The only thing more unsettling than her sudden disappearance was realizing she was still sitting beside him in the reflection of the terminal glass. The fluorescent lights of the terminal hummed above me. As I sat at gate C12, my flight delayed for the third time that night. The board above flickered as if struggling to decide whether my flight would ever leave. I kept staring at it, almost willing it to stay still, but every time I looked away, the numbers seemed to change. The air felt heavy, stale in a way that made me wonder if the ventilation system had stopped working hours ago. It wasn't hot, just still, unmoving, as though the entire terminal had been sealed off from the outside world. My phone battery had died long ago, so there was nothing to distract me from the hollow, echoing emptiness around me. There were no announcements except for the occasional distant voice calling flights I wasn't on, and even those sounded muffled, distorted, like they were being played from a recording that had degraded over decades. Outside the wide glass wall, the tarmac stretched into the blackness of the night. Far off, blinking red and white lights marked the presence of other planes, but they looked smaller than they should have, as if they were farther away than the size of the runway would allow. I couldn't see the runway workers moving, which was strange. Usually there was always someone driving baggage carts or guiding planes. The longer I stared, the more it felt like I was looking at a photograph instead of a live scene. I shifted in my seat, the vinyl cushion creaking beneath me, and scanned the rows of empty chairs. The emptiness was unsettling. An airport this size should have been buzzing even late at night, but the only sound was the occasional roll of luggage wheels somewhere far behind me. I leaned back, trying to relax, but the corner of my vision caught a shape that froze me in place. In the glass reflection, there was a figure standing several seats away. It was tall and its silhouette didn't seem right. Its shoulders sloped down unnaturally, and its head tilted in a way that made my neck ache just looking at it. I whipped my head around toward the seats. Nothing, completely empty. But when my eyes drifted back to the window, the reflection was still there, standing exactly where it had been. I leaned forward, trying to focus, but the figure didn't move, didn't even shift its weight. My breathing became shallow as I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light. Maybe a pillar, maybe a shadow. Yet there was nothing behind me that could have created that shape. A janitor passed by, pushing a mop bucket. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, and he didn't glance at me. I noticed water dripping from his mop, leaving a trail behind him, but when I looked into the bucket, it was completely dry. He disappeared into the hallway without a sound, not even the squeak of wheels. I rubbed my eyes and sat back, telling myself I was just tired, but I kept glancing at the glass. The figure remained completely motionless. My mind began to spiral, imagining it inching closer when I wasn't looking, standing right behind me without a sound. The thought made my skin crawl. I pulled my jacket tighter. Though the air wasn't cold, if anything, it was too still, pressing in on me. Somewhere deep in the terminal, a loudspeaker crackled, the static dragging out for too long before a distorted voice mumbled something I couldn't make out. The sound faded, but the reflection didn't. My heart pounded harder with each passing second. I wanted to leave, but every direction away from gate C12 felt darker, quieter, like stepping into those hallways would be worse than staying here. I told myself I'd watch it just a little longer, prove it wasn't real. But as my eyes locked onto it again, I noticed something I hadn't before. The head was tilting farther, slowly, as though it knew I was watching. A tight, prickling sensation spread down my spine. I blinked, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw it raise an arm. I turned around again, nothing there. Yet when I looked back at the glass, the figure had moved one seat closer. Hours dragged by in a slow, suffocating rhythm, each second stretching until it felt like minutes. The terminal seemed emptier now, though I couldn't remember seeing anyone leave. The electronic board above my gate kept flickering in irregular bursts, the numbers jumping between times that made no sense. Sometimes my flight was delayed by 20 minutes, other times it claimed we'd already departed hours ago. I sat frozen, wondering if I was trapped in some endless loop that the rest of the world had forgotten about. The hum of the lights overhead became louder, almost like a swarm of insects, and I realized I could no longer hear any announcements. It was as if the airport had stopped speaking entirely. I decided to move, thinking maybe walking around would clear my head. My shoes tapped softly on the polished floor, each step echoing back to me in a way that felt slightly delayed, as though the sound was reluctant to return. I passed empty gates, the same molded plastic chairs repeating over and over like a copy-and-paste image. Eventually, I turned a corner, and for a moment I thought I had found a different area until I saw the sign. Gate C12. It made no sense. I had walked away from it, in the opposite direction, and yet here it was again. I turned back and followed another path, moving past dark vending machines and silent moving walkways. But when I stepped off, I was staring at the same worn carpet, the same row of seats, the same blinking screen reading C12. The air felt colder now, enough that I could see faint traces of my breath when I exhaled. My skin prickled as if a draft had wrapped itself around me, though the space was completely sealed. I noticed the luggage, then old brown leather with brass fittings dulled from age, sat 2 seats down from where I had been earlier, as though it had been waiting for me. Its handle was frayed, and the tag was blank, the lettering worn down to nothing. Something about it felt wrong. I stepped toward it cautiously, half expecting someone to appear and claim it, but the area was silent, the only sound, the faint buzz of the lights above. As I reached for the handle, a noise broke the stillness, a heavy thump from somewhere behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, like something solid had been set down on the floor. My heart jumped. Slowly I turned, scanning the terminal. Far across the open space, near the glass wall, the tall figure was there again. It was standing between 2 empty rows of chairs, perfectly still. Even at a distance, I could tell its proportions were wrong. Its arms seemed too long, and its head was tilted at that same unnatural angle. My body locked up, and I could hear the faint rush of blood in my ears. I blinked, and the space where it stood was empty yet. The air felt heavier, as though it had moved without moving. Then came the footsteps. Slow, steady, measured. They echoed faintly. Each one stretched out as if whoever or whatever was walking wanted me to know it was coming. I couldn't tell from which direction they came. They seemed to shift with each sound, sometimes behind me, sometimes off to the side, sometimes impossibly far away. I backed away from the luggage, my eyes darting from one shadow to another. The terminal suddenly felt too big, too empty, as though it had grown in size when I wasn't looking. Every sign I passed still pointed toward C12, no matter which way I turned. I was caught in a maze with only one destination. The footsteps didn't grow louder, but they didn't fade either. They followed me with the same slow pace, unhurried but certain. My skin crawled, the back of my neck tightening with each sound. I wanted to run, but a deep, irrational part of me feared that moving too quickly would only make it follow faster. I tried to focus on the far end of the terminal, telling myself there had to be another way out. But the further I walked, the more the shadows seemed to stretch, curling at the edges of my vision like smoke. The cold deepened, my breath now fully visible in the dim light. I glanced over my shoulder, heart pounding, and froze. The luggage was there again, just a few feet behind me, as if it had been following me all along. The sound of those slow, deliberate footsteps never stopped, yet I couldn't see anyone. They were always somewhere behind me, shifting in direction, impossible to track. I moved closer to the massive glass wall that looked out onto the runway, hoping for some kind of anchor in this disorienting place. The outside should have been alive with motion, ground crew working, lights flashing, vehicles moving across the tarmac, but everything was frozen. Planes stood in perfect stillness, their navigation lights blinking at the exact same rhythm, as if caught in a loop. The workers who should have been moving baggage or signaling pilots were there, but they weren't moving at all. They stood rigid, facing away from me, their outlines faint in the hazy light. It didn't even look like they were breathing. My eyes drifted to my own reflection in the glass. At first it looked normal, my pale face under the artificial light, my hair slightly mussed from hours of waiting. But then I noticed something wrong. The reflection wasn't perfectly in sync with me. When I shifted my weight or tilted my head, it responded a fraction of a second later. That tiny delay sent a cold ripple through my chest. I lifted my hand slightly, testing it, and the reflection followed, but too slowly. Then, without warning, it smiled. My actual face had stayed still. I stumbled back from the glass, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection's smile lingered for a moment longer before fading back to match my expression, as though it had only been teasing me. My skin felt clammy, my fingers numb from the cold. That was when I noticed the luggage again. It was sitting just a few feet from me now, its brown leather cracked under the harsh lights. The zipper was open. I knew it had been closed before. The gap revealed nothing but a dense, absolute darkness that swallowed the light around it. I crouched slightly, peering into it, expecting to see the faint shape of fabric lining or packed clothes. Instead, there was only black, deep, endless, suffocating. My breathing grew louder in my ears. The footsteps behind me stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pressing in on me from every direction. In the reflection on the glass, I saw movement. From inside the open luggage, a long pale hand was slowly reaching outward. The fingers were unnaturally thin, the skin stretched tight, the nails long and sharp enough to catch the faint overhead light. It didn't move quickly, it didn't have to. Each inch forward felt deliberate, like it was savoring the motion. I spun around, but the bag was zipped shut again, sitting in the exact same spot. My stomach turned over. I could still feel the presence of that hand in my mind, as though it had been reaching not just into the air, but toward me specifically. The cold grew sharper, seeping into my bones. I backed away, my shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. My eyes flicked between the luggage and the glass, afraid to focus too long on either. In the window, the frozen workers still faced away from me, but I thought I saw one of them twitch, a faint jerk of the head, as though straining to turn. The reflection of the tall figure appeared again between 2 rows of seats, closer now than before. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the air itself had thickened around me. My chest tightened with each breath, the cold burning in my throat. I took a step backward, then another, keeping my eyes fixed on the reflection. The figure didn't move, but every blink seemed to shorten the distance between us. The lights above me flickered once, twice, then steadied. The footsteps began again, closer, slower, and more certain. The luggage was gone. I turned in a panic, scanning the rows of seats, but it was nowhere in sight. Then I looked back at the glass and saw it reflected there, sitting directly behind my own image, the zipper slowly sliding open. I ran. At least, I tried to. My movements felt sluggish, like I was pushing against water, each step heavier than the last. The polished floor stretched out in every direction, reflecting the overhead lights in long, distorted streaks that seemed to slide away as I chased them. I didn't look back at first, afraid of what I might see. All I could hear was the steady rhythm of something dragging across the floor behind me, a dull, scraping sound that followed no matter how fast I tried to move. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, my stomach dropped. The rows of seats had multiplied, lining both sides of a corridor that hadn't been there before. Each row was identical, same dull gray upholstery, same faint stains on the armrests, same angle of shadow falling across them. Between the rows, the tall figure appeared, shifting in and out of view like a bad signal. Closer each time it reappeared. It didn't walk. It simply existed in one spot, then another, erasing the space between us without crossing it. I turned forward again and saw something impossible. Gate C12 stood at the end of the hall. Not the same one I had been at earlier. It was stretched, elongated. The sign flickering between my flight number and a string of nonsense characters that looked more like scratches than letters. I headed toward it anyway, thinking maybe it was an exit, maybe it was the only way out. As I ran, the lights above me began going out one by one, starting from far ahead and racing toward me. Darkness swept over the floor like a moving wall. The sound of the dragging grew louder, closer, until it seemed to scrape directly against the soles of my shoes. I veered to the side, hoping to duck into another gate, but every doorway I passed bore the same sign. C12. No matter which direction I turned, I ended up facing the same number, the same flickering board. The air grew colder with every step. My breath came in sharp bursts of white mist, hanging in the air far too long before fading. The carpet beneath my feet changed without warning from the coarse, patterned weave of an airport floor to something smooth and damp. I looked down and saw that I was standing on dark, water-stained tiles. My reflection looked back up at me from their glossy surface, but it wasn't quite me. The face was paler, the eyes too wide, the mouth opened slightly as though whispering something I couldn't hear. The dragging sound stopped. The silence that followed was so deep it rang in my ears. My pulse hammered in my temples as I stood frozen, staring into my warped reflection. Then, just beyond my own image, another reflection appeared, its head tilted impossibly far, the same tall frame looming just over my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing there. A faint scratching drew my gaze back to the walls. The numbers on the gate signs were changing. C12 was being overwritten, the lines and curves of the characters bending, rearranging, until each sign displayed my name. Over and over, glowing faintly in the dim light, my name stretched across every exit, every direction. My hands trembled as I backed away from the walls, my footsteps slow now, more cautious than desperate. I no longer knew where I was heading, only that staying still felt like an invitation. The air smelled faintly of metal and dust, as though I had stepped into a place no one had entered for years. Somewhere behind me, the dragging resumed, slower than before but closer, each scrape deliberate, unhurried. I pressed myself against the cold wall, trying to make myself small. The flickering lights cast broken shadows across the floor, and in the jagged gaps between them, I saw something move, not the tall figure this time, but something lower to the ground, crawling slowly along the tiles. Its shape was wrong, too long, its limbs bending in angles that made my stomach turn. I blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by the next patch of shadow. When I looked up, the lights above had stopped flickering. The terminal was still again, except for the signs. My name was glowing on every gate, burning brighter with each second, as if the walls themselves were calling to me. I don't remember falling, but I woke lying on the cold floor, my cheek pressed against the smooth tiles. My ears were ringing, and for a moment I thought I was back in the real airport, the distant hum of lights, the faint echo of movement. But when I lifted my head, I realized the world around me was wrong. The terminal was dark. Every overhead light had gone out, except for a faint, cold glow seeping in through the glass wall. The glow wasn't like normal light, it was bluish, thin, and seemed to move slightly, as though alive. I pushed myself up, every muscle aching, and stepped toward the windows. Outside, the tarmac stretched endlessly, but it wasn't the same place I had seen before. The planes were old, their metal bodies dulled and streaked with rust. Frost clung to their wings even though the air didn't feel freezing. The ground vehicles stood abandoned, their tires flat, their windows shattered. And in the faint light, I could see shadows, moving, not human shadows, but long, bent shapes that shifted and twitched even when the wind was still. I turned toward the reflection in the glass and froze. The tall figure stood beside me, its faceless head angled down toward mine. It was so close I could almost feel the air where its breath should have been, but there was nothing, only silence. My heart hammered as I spun to face it, but the space beside me was empty. When I looked back at the glass, the reflection was still there, unmoving. The glow outside intensified, pulling my attention away from the figure. My eyes followed it, and that's when I saw something that made my stomach twist. Out on the frozen tarmac, I saw myself. I was boarding one of the ancient planes, climbing the stairs with my head down, moving in slow, deliberate steps. The version of me didn't look around, didn't hesitate. It simply disappeared into the plane's open doorway. I stumbled backward, my pulse quickening, unable to look away. In the reflection I was still standing at the glass, but the other me was gone now, swallowed by the aircraft's dark interior. A faint movement in the glass caught my eye. My reflection's lips were moving. The words were silent, but I could see the shapes they formed. It was repeating the same thing, over and over. I leaned closer, trying to read them, but the more I focused, the more the letters seemed to blur. The cold glow faded for a moment, and I thought maybe it was over. Then, behind me, I heard the sound of something dragging across the floor again. Slow, heavy, closer. I turned, but the terminal wasn't the same anymore. The gates were gone. The walls were gone. There was only an open space filled with rows and rows of the same old luggage, identical to the one I had seen before. Each one sat with its zipper just slightly open, darkness seeping out like a living thing. The sound grew louder, echoing from somewhere between the rows. I moved forward, unsure whether I was walking toward it or trying to escape. Every time I passed a suitcase, I could swear the opening widened slightly, as though each one was turning toward me. The cold air thickened, making my breath shallow and rapid. Something shifted ahead. A single suitcase began sliding across the floor toward me, not quickly, but with the same steady inevitability as the footsteps I'd been hearing all night. My legs refused to move, my body locked in place. The suitcase stopped just a few inches from my shoes. Slowly, the zipper began to pull itself open. Inside there was nothing but black. It wasn't emptiness, it was the same endless, swallowing dark I had seen before, and this time, it felt like it was looking back at me. A pale hand emerged, thin and sharp-fingered, followed by another. They gripped the edges of the case as something began to pull itself out, its head tilted at that same unnatural angle. I backed away, but the space behind me had changed again. The glass wall was there, and in it, my reflection was gone. Only the tall figure stood in my place, smiling with my face.